What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Today, I want to talk to you about Star Wars. This is a series that started at Marvel shortly after Disney bought Lucasfilms in 2012. I think this was a year or two after they bought Lucasfilms. I think it took a little bit of time for them to stop doing the Star Wars stuff at Dark Horse and then move everything over to Marvel. This is written by Jason Aaron with art by John Cassaday, Simone Bianchi, Stuart Eminem, Wade Vaughn Grawbadger, Laura Martin, and Justin Ponzor. And this is the first 12 issues of that series. There is no subtitle like, Star Wars Attack of the Gundarks or something like that. There's nothing like that. So you just have to look up Star Wars, Jason Aaron, and then all those artists, and then find whatever those books are called. And this is the hardcover collecting the first 12 issues. And this is okay. I didn't really find myself loving or hating it. There are a couple of moments in this that I liked quite a bit that I'll talk about here in a minute, but overall, I found myself very neutral on this book. I think part of it is I just don't care about what happens to the main Star Wars characters in between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. And you might remember a few years ago when I was doing my 365-day graphic novel review challenge, there was a Darth Vader ongoing series by Kieran Gillen and Salvador Larroca. And that was happening right around the same time as this series. In fact, there is a crossover between those two series, and then there's some minor crossing over that's not a full-on crossover within this book. And I really liked that series. I spoke very highly of it when I did my reviews of it. I haven't read those books since then, but I remember really enjoying that series. And you might be saying, why did I enjoy this series that's about what was Darth Vader doing in between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back? But I say that I don't care about what Luke and Han and Leia were doing in between those movies. And looking at what Kieran Gillen and Salvador Larroca were doing on the Vader book, they had a very difficult task ahead of them. At least I think they did, because you have a villain who is the protagonist of your book, and you're not allowed to redeem him in any way. He still has to be a villain by the time you get to the events of Empire Strikes Back. And I thought that's going to be a very interesting challenge, and I think they were more or less able to pull it off. They did kind of fumble the ball a little bit there towards the end of that series. As I understand it, they kind of had a last-minute notification that they were going to get canceled, so they had to wrap everything up very quickly. So I don't think that series was 100% solid across the board, but I don't entirely think that was their fault. But they had what I feel like was an interesting challenge, and I think they did a pretty good job making me care about this guy while also keeping him villainous enough that he can still be the bad guy for all of Empire Strikes Back and 99% of Return of the Jedi. So I really liked what they were doing there, and I enjoyed it. With this, I never found myself asking, I wonder what Luke, Han, and Leia were up to after the events of A New Hope and before Empire Strikes Back. That was never something that really crossed my mind, but apparently it's something that has crossed many other minds, because this is not the first time that premise has been used, if I'm not mistaken. Right before Disney purchased Lucasfilms at Dark Horse, there was a series written by Brian Wood. I don't know who the artist was, but I believe Alex Ross did the covers, and that was, I think, the same basic premise. It picks up right after A New Hope, and it's kind of showing you what these guys were doing in between movies. And I don't understand why that's a premise that's so popular that within the span of 2 years, we had it twice at two different companies. I don't really understand that, and none of this is necessarily bad. There were a couple moments I liked. I'll go ahead and talk about what those were. There's one moment where Luke and Vader meet for the first time, technically, because they didn't really meet in Star Wars. Luke saw him kill Obi-Wan, but they didn't meet. And so this is the first time they meet, and Vader actually gets Luke Skywalker, Luke's lightsaber that Obi-Wan gave him in A New Hope. And then he's looking at it, he says, wait a minute, I recognize this lightsaber because it's Anakin's lightsaber. And then he's about to spill the beans, and then he gets interrupted. I kind of like that. And then there is a scene where Boba Fett, he has been hired to figure out who it was who destroyed the Death Star. And then he tells Vader, and then Vader gets really mad, and the windows start cracking. And both of those are picked up and run with in the Vader series. I liked both of those elements a little bit better in the Vader series, because what Jason Aaron and his collaborators are doing here, they are basically pretending like A New Hope is the only Star Wars movie, and they're kind of saying like, we don't know what happens next, so here is what happens next. Whereas Vader, you know that Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker in that series, but here you have no idea. So if you took someone who has never heard of Star Wars before, that's a tall order, I know, but if you found someone like that and then you made them watch A New Hope and then you gave them this book, they would look at Darth Vader getting mad and the windows start cracking as, okay, Darth Vader killed Anakin Skywalker according to Obi-Wan Kenobi, and now he's getting mad because he hears that Anakin Skywalker had a kid who blew up the Death Star, and now he wants revenge on that kid or something like that. That's kind of how that scene is playing here, but then if you go and read the Darth Vader series, when he finds that out, he has all these flashbacks to the prequels, and he realizes that the Emperor lied to him, and he has a son out there somewhere, and that's when he starts formulating his plan that he's going to try and depose the Emperor and get with his son, and they'll rule the galaxy as father and son. And so that moment is kind of a pseudo crossover between these books, but I like it so much better in the Darth Vader book because there's a lot more context to it, and it really deepens the character of Darth Vader. Because while I love the Star Wars movies, I love the original trilogy, Darth Vader himself is not much of a deep character, at least in the first two movies. He's just the bad guy who betrayed the Jedi and killed Luke's father, as far as Luke knows. There's not really a whole lot of depth to him, and the Vader series kind of gives you a little bit of that depth in just a couple of quick scenes. And this, I don't feel like really has that. There's a whole lot of me thinking, I just don't care, I just want to get to the next movie. And that's not something that I should be thinking. And ordinarily, I like most of the creators who are working on this book. I like a lot of Jason Aaron's work outside of this book. And it's not bad, it's just not something that's really tickling me in the right way. There's one issue here where Luke is reading Obi-Wan Kenobi's diary, and it's a flashback to when Luke was maybe 8. I like that issue a lot. If this was just an Obi-Wan Kenobi book that was set in between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, I would be all over that, because I would really like to see a lot more of what he was doing. I've said before, like, oh, come on, he was just living in a cave for 20 years, but I think you could do some interesting stuff with Obi-Wan interacting with a criminal element on Tatooine, and that's what this issue does a little bit of, and so I like that issue. But then outside of that, it's more of we're waiting to see them get to the point where they're at in The Empire Strikes Back. At one point, there's this woman who wants to kidnap Han. She's telling Leia that she is Han Solo's wife, and Han says about 85 times, she's not my wife, she's not my wife, and we all know that because we've all seen The Empire Strikes Back. And at no point did anyone mention, hey, remember Han's wife? So when we see this character and she says, I'm his wife, we all know that that's not true. And then Han even tells Leia, this is what happened, this is why she's saying that she's my wife. And then in the very last issue of this book, she comes clean and says, no, I'm not really his wife. And I'm thinking, we already knew that. Leia should have already known that. I wish that this had played out a little bit differently, where Leia confronts this woman and says, you're not really Han's wife, why don't you come clean? Instead, the woman comes clean to Leia, and it's like Leia says, oh, okay, you're not his wife. I didn't really care for that, and this lady apparently continues to be a big part of the Marvel Star Wars Expanded Universe comics. She meets Dr. Aphra at one point, who is from the Vader series. I was looking up this character to see what the deal is with her, because in the last issue, she tells Leia that she needs money, and she's got, like, the speech bubble looks kind of weird, like she's sick, and she was trapped under a rock. So that might be part of it, but I thought, okay, maybe she's sick. Maybe she's got some kind of fatal disease and she needs money so that she can buy medicine or something like that, and that's why she was going to kidnap Han. But earlier in the book, Leia said that she would pay this lady if she would let them go, and the lady said, I don't want your money. And then towards the end, she says that she wants money from Han, so it's a little confusing, and I'm assuming if you pick up the next book that starts with issue 13, it might get into that a little bit more, so I was reading up on her to see if that's explained any, and I don't know if it is or not. But overall, I would say if you are just a gigantic Star Wars fan, like much more than I am, then you should check this out. It's got some good art across the board. The characterization is pretty solid. These characters do feel consistent with the characters that we see in New Hope and Empire, the original trilogy. But overall, I found myself thinking this was just a waste of time, and that's more harsh than what I mean for it to sound, but I really like that Vader series, and that's doing basically the same thing that this is doing. It's filling in the blanks in between the movies. So in theory, I should have been completely on board with this, especially with how much it ties in with that Vader series, sort of. But overall, I just found myself saying, I don't care. There's a whole lot of stuff here where I'm just like, it's okay, but I just don't really find myself saying, yes, this is great, I want to read the next issue. So I would recommend it kind of coolly to people who are bigger Star Wars fans than I am. But if you're a casual Star Wars fan, if you like dabbling in Star Wars stuff, but you don't just find yourself needing to complete your Star Wars collection, you could skip this one, I think. So overall, those are my thoughts on this Star Wars book. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back in the future with more videos. In the meantime, have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.